Welcome, everyone, and a big welcome to Rob Crandall of the On Target Simulations team and the lead developer for Flashpoint Campaigns Southern Storm. Hello, Rob. Welcome.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to be here.
So, we talk with each other pretty often, but it's nice to have a chance to talk together with our customers about Flashpoint Campaigns Southern Storm, which is coming, and we'll talk more about the details of that timing later. So I just want to give a little bit of an introduction to those who may not be familiar with the Flashpoint Campaigns series, which is one of my favorites. Flashpoint Campaigns, I would say, is a very distinguished historical wargame series. It's been recognized by many through a lot of reviews and customer feedback as the best grand tactical Cold War computer wargame in existence. And I think it has some very unique features. One of the things I want to highlight to those who may not be familiar with it is that it is a WeGo war game. In other words, both sides put in their orders simultaneously and then they are executed simultaneously, which leads to some really great fog of war and friction of war. And also the turns are asynchronous and based on the effective command and control of each side. And it's effectively a simulation of Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, or observe, orient, decide, and act. In other words, how quickly each side gets through its command cycle. And of course, it also models pretty much every aspect of combat during a hypothetical Cold War gone hot in 1989. But there's now, I think Flashpoint Campaigns fans know all that. Those who haven't played Flashpoint Campaigns, there's a little teaser of what you may find unique as a wargame experience in Flashpoint Campaigns. But a lot of people may not realize that Flashpoint Campaigns also has a long history of its own in wargaming. And I wonder if you could briefly tell us how all this got started for you, first with Simulations Canada, then Matrix Games and Slytherin.
Certainly. I live in Canada, and I hooked up with Simulations Canada back in something like 1985. I made 3 games for them and for the IBM PC. And basically, they were almost text games. Or, not a dungeon crawl, but a bit of a text game, only it was a
Right.
war game. There were no graphics. And I very much enjoyed that. Matrix bought out the rights to those games in early 2000, as I recall.
Yep.
And as a former developer for them, I contacted Matrix and said, what's going on? Are you going to redevelop these? And I was told, yes, we would love to. How would you like to do it? And here's a choice of topics.
Yep.
And one of the choices was, like Greece or Red Sky Morning, which was a naval air strategic thing. Awfully a lot like Command, possibly, if you'd gone back that far in time. And the other was Main Battle Tank, which was set in a hypothetical Cold War gone hot situation in Germany, central Germany. And you're commanding a battalion, typically, a strong battalion. And I thought, oh, that's a change for me. I've done a lot of naval air and I'm interested in that. So let's go with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2002 that we said, okay, let's go. And in 2005, Flashpoint Germany came out. It was in January. And that's what it was. It was kind of like a Panzerblitz on computer almost. It was meant to be at the simpler end of things and more accessible to people.
Very fun war game.
Thank you. I thought it was a hoot, and it was well received. And I went through something like 14 further iterations of the game between 2005 and 2011, something like that. And then I decided, no, it's time for a major engine rewrite. And by then, I had a team. I had been a solo developer to start with, but with Flashpoint Germany being out, I attracted a couple more people, and we all started working together. Became On Target Simulations.
And the team has continued to grow in size.
It has, adding members to this day. There's a lot of work to do. We have to share it. But going back, what was it? October 2013. That's when we released Flashpoint Campaigns Red Storm. And that one was actively in development up until November 2017, which doesn't seem that long ago. We had something like 14 improvements and iterations. We got a tremendous amount of feedback from our players. And when you're modeling and simulating this historical time period, there are a lot of people out there who were in those armed forces at the time and can say, yeah, I was a tanker and I was doing this, I was doing that. And one of the nicest compliments we got ultimately was a Red Army tanker. And he bought the game, he played it, played the Russian side using Soviet tactics, doing it the way they were trained, and he won. He said, "This is fantastic. This actually works."
It's been a long road. I mean, and you and I started working together back on Flashpoint Germany, so it's been almost 2 decades now that we've been working together, and a lot of the team have been together for a long time too.
Indeed, we've had Monday calls for years and years and years, Eric. Yeah, very stable team. Once people join, they never seem to want to leave. That's all good.
And now in recent times, you and the OTS team have been spending a lot of time working with the military, the U.S. military, the U.K. military, a few others on professional projects, which are based on the Flashpoint campaign's design. And we can't talk much about that, nor is that the focus of this stream, other than that it's been keeping you all very, very busy. But at the same time, we know that there are a lot of wargamers who've been asking, well, when are we going to get to see more Flashpoint campaigns for wargamers? And in the background, you've been working on a new commercial release for many years now as a follow-on, which we are calling Flashpoint Campaigns Southern Storm. And now, for someone who has played Flashpoint Campaigns Red Storm or other wargamers who haven't, if you had to put together, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, if you had to put together a brief elevator pitch, just from your point of view, what stands out for you as far as why they would be excited about Southern Storm? What makes it different for them?
The general elevator pitch, and I still like it the best, is the Cold War in Germany goes hot. This was the first team on each side, the best of the best, all the most modern, potent gear. They had to win. There was no fooling around. There was no going back. It was do or die in what was at that time the most lethal battle environment ever seen on a battlefield. To be seen was to be killed was the mantra then. The slightly longer version of that is that this is high intensity, modern grand tactical combat. And by grand tactical, I mean range matters, but facing doesn't. So you're commanding platoons, companies, you're overall in command of a strong battalion or a strong regiment typically. And you've got a day to secure your objectives, to do whatever your mission is. And let the chips fall where they may, because you might be lucky to get to the end of the day with even a shred of your original forces. They were talking at the time of the half-life of a soldier at the sharp end being 2-3 hours. You can see that happening in this game.
Well, you got me sold. Let's get into the details a bit now with respect to Southern Storm. Now, as far as the scope and the scale, so you talked a little bit about Grand Tactical, and I do think that's an underused scale, which Flashpoint Campaigns does very well, where it's tactical enough that you can really get into the details of the equipment and they matter. But it's just a step up above the single man, single vehicle. So you actually have battles that are of significant size and are significantly meaningful, and you're exploring tactics that are just a step above what a squad leader would be thinking of. What about the setting? So in Southern Storm, where is this set in terms of the Cold War, and what nations are included, and what do you have planned as far as the general amount of content that's going to be included?
Game is set again in the summer of 1989. That's really the last time that the Warsaw Pact had a feasible chance doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And also, battlefield computers, modern precision guided weapons, things like that, was still a gleam in the eye. They had a few things, but things changed radically after that. So this is the best of the Cold War hardware. So set in the southern third of Germany, the NATO lineup at that point on our side of the inter-German border was US 5th Corps, 7th Corps, West German 2nd Corps. So you had Americans and West Germans. Facing them were the Soviets with lots of East German allies, which will be new to the game, Czechoslovakian forces, which are new to the game. And then in depth behind the NATO front line were French, substantial French forces, and a Canadian brigade. So we're adding East Germans, Czechs, Canadians, and French, the four nationalities we have in the first game.
Awesome.
Maps, pardon me, typically are 15 to 20 kilometers in size, same as before. But as part of the massive rewrites that we've been doing in the engine this few years and to help support our professional users, we can go quite a bit larger now. You can go to 40 by 30 kilometer maps, which are 4 times the area. That creates all kinds of interesting new things because to survive in a Cold War battlefield, you had to be pretty dispersed. You could not concentrate, or you'd simply be obliterated from above. And so this really gives you a lot of room to maneuver. The density of forces is quite low, and you're playing sort of a cat and mouse hide and seek game.
And it's very realistic for the theater and the time frame.
Yeah. You just could not be spotted. It was death to be picked out too quickly. And so it gets kind of interesting. It's almost a bit like a naval battle. I often think of the Battle of Midway, where there was that all-important reconnaissance phase right at the beginning. Each side's feeling out where the other one might be.
Right.
And then when they do, they drop the hammer. And you want to be the first to attack first. And you would think that would have no application to a ground game, but darn it, you have to pay attention to the recon battle. You have to think about where you're positioning your units and what avenues of advance they're going to use and how they're going to get from one place to another. And if you're a little too lighthearted and don't pay attention to the details, you can get your head handed to you very quickly by inferior forces.
The lethality is very, there's a lot of lethality on that battlefield, that's for sure. You touched briefly on this, but you mentioned that you can handle larger maps. Now, I just want to mention also, it's a 64-bit engine now, correct?
The maps consume, so much memory, and we have multiple layers to each map, and then multiple size maps for the scrolling and zooming and all that kind of thing. So 32 bits just wasn't enough.
And from what I've seen in my own testing, everything's a bit faster than it was, for those who are used to, the last commercial release.
That was a design goal. We've rewritten everything. All the combat models are much more detailed, all kinds of things. The information displays are all much more detailed. But we had to keep it running as fast as the previous game. And we also had to not impose any more burden on the player to play. If you played the old game, you could sit down and play the new game. And yes, there are all kinds of new things to play with and, extra buttons and whistles and cool little items that you can dwell on. But you don't have to. The game supplies reasonable defaults. You can just go and do it the way you did before.
And I think we're going to provide some screenshots as part of this presentation, but I just want to say that the new user interface is very nice from my standpoint. You've got, those floating and dockable panels. As you just mentioned, you've got some of these, additional reports and overlays that you can drill down into if you wish. You've got extra status indicators. So a player can kind of configure the game to look and inform them the way they want, right?
Yes, exactly. We wanted to make it look more presentable and also to use screen space more efficiently. And one of the design team was a staff officer in a division. And he said, if we're going to do all this work, let's organize it correctly. Let's have reports by staff officer. Here's what the operations officer says. Here's what Intel says. Here's what some of the other guys said. And probably have 10 times now the staff information that we did before. So you can orient much better before a battle, during a battle, reviewing, seeing what.
And let's talk about the data and the combat resolution as well. So why don't you walk us through a little bit, sort of in what ways, from your perspective, um, is the combat and the data improved from Red Storm?
We deepened the data model in almost every aspect. There's simply more of everything, and in some cases, it's by an order of magnitude. More units, more depth to the units, more in the way of sensors, ammunition types, all kinds of things, to increase the fidelity of the simulation. If the player doesn't want to pay attention, doesn't have to. He does. He can learn a whole lot of things that will be very important to him. And then that's all surfaced in the information displays. So we had, in the first game, a subunit inspector, which was just a small little presented highlight information. Now it's got 5 pages of information. It's hard to summarize just in a single thing, but virtually every step of the process, from spotting through to delivering fire to the damage and the effects of fire, been rewritten, deepened, tightened up.
Well, I think that's what you really want to get across, is that really no stone has been left unturned over the years since the last commercial release. The entire model has had a relook and an overhaul, if you will. As you said, everything from spotting to the actual resolution of the shots. And it's worth mentioning also, for those who may not be used to playing a WeGo game, you've got what are called standard operating procedures. And they've got reasonable defaults, but you can also configure these as a player. So you can tell your units, hey, I want you to do this, but if these contingencies come up, here's how I want you to react. And that type of guidance, gives you the capability to have your will enacted on the battlefield without necessarily being there every moment, which is important because as that OTA loop, as that C3 delay, either through casualties, disruption to your command structure, electronic warfare, all of which is modeled in the game, as that piles up, you may get fewer and fewer opportunities to intervene in a more direct sort of, micromanaging way, and more situations where you have to rely that, boy, you hope you could put your guys in the right place. You hope those SOPs were good and that the enemy isn't going to be too clever in circumventing your plans. Now, there are a couple more things I wanted to call out. You have engineers set up as separate forces now, and I think you also have the capability to have multinational forces. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. In the old game, engineering was abstracted. So if a river blocked the advance of a unit and needed a bridge, the unit would move to the riverbank, check off a checkbox, basically said, somebody build me a bridge. And half an hour later, a bridge would appear. Now we have discrete engineering units who have to be sent to go build that bridge. And we did that because engineers are scarce and precious. And the Warsaw Pact trained like mad to do bridges. They would have to do a bridge every 10 kilometers or something. And so the fight to stop those engineering units from getting those bridges across was supremely important. Now that we represent the engineers directly, you can call artillery strikes on them, interfere with their progress. And that changes the character of the game. It seems a higher fidelity now to have those. And you may get 4 bridging columns, and you better protect them. You better take good care of them, or you'll be stuck on the wrong side of the river from your victory objective.
Awesome. And with multinational forces, what type of situations do you envision that being used for? I mean, obviously, NATO is a multinational force. Are players going to be able to have 2 nations in the same scenario on the same side?
Yes, as many as they like, really. The weakest part of the front line is the seam between major formations, because each one wants the other to take care of it. And so there's a seam between the American and West German forces. And then as the French engage, there are lots of seams there too. So yes, that would be a logical place to run a Warsaw Pact force through. And I suppose it's true vice versa. You know, if they were on their back foot,
Right.
we'd be looking for their seams. Um, the Canadian role in all this, as near as I can tell, this was in a book a while ago, was specifically to help seal up seams.
Hmm.
They were deep in the rear. They didn't know where the seam would quite end up, but they were going to be the stopper.
They were the fire brigade. Yeah.
Indeed. And so we're looking to have some standalone scenarios for them. There'll be probably 14 to 16 standalone, featuring all the various forces. And then a campaign for each of the major nationalities. And there'll be one for the Canadians as well, where they're kind of the fire brigade and hoping to high heavens that the enemy's attrited enough by the time it gets to them that they can make it a fair fight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I should say the content is something that's still very much a work in progress. We're working with some very experienced scenario designers on that, but I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm sure you're looking forward to being able to run the Canadians through their paces. I know I'll be giving that a try. I've also got some friends who served in the 7th Corps at this time, so I've got some personal curiosity there too. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention here is I know a lot of people will ask this question. So, have you spent any time on the AI?
Massively. We have a guy on the team, William, who literally has written chapters in game programming books on AI. I very gratefully handed over the baton to him a few years ago now. And yeah, there's some substantial AI improvements in it. Starting with the ability of a collection of units to think as a group. We kind of simulated that before, but now we actually do it. And there's a whole new system of setting up hints to each player. You know, here's what you should do. It's not a scripting system. It simply sets weights and things that give a lot more replayability and create more interesting situations for the AI. And something else that we're doing is that we're setting up different setup zones. So if there's a scenario, there's not just one setup zone for each side. There can be as many as the scenario author likes. And you can really move units around. And concurrently with that, he can set up separate victory point locations. So you might use the victory point locations to incent forces to go in certain directions and secure certain objectives. And best of all, you can now hide those victory point locations from the other side. So you may have a game where, the red force is going to start in the south. Well, no, it's going to be southeast. The third variation, they're in the east. And the victory point locations they're driving for, they're playing for, are hidden from you as the NATO player. And so you really have to have your wits about you to try and fathom it out. And even if you played it 3 or 4 times, it still will not play exactly the same each time. And you can't take anything for granted. So it creates this marvelous fog of war and all this tension and uncertainty until right comes down to the final end. So we really enjoy that. We're looking forward to getting lots of feedback on that from people.
Rob, that sounds awesome. And I have to say, overall, that's one heck of a set of features and improvements. And I'll tell everyone here, from what I've seen working with the OTS team, the result is going to be something that every wargamer who is interested in the Cold War, you're going to want this on your computer. And as we wrap this up, Rob, I've got just a couple more questions for you. So when can wargamers expect to likely see this title?
Knock on wood, Eric, but the fall of 2021.
Excellent. And then my last question for you is, looking back on all your experiences to date, do you have any words of wisdom or advice for war game developers or designers who might be considering whether to make a war game or might be starting work on their first war game?
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you, Eric. There are just a few things I'd concentrate on. As a programmer, limit the scope of what you're trying to do with your game. It's so easy to imagine all the things you'd like it to do, and the work expands exponentially, and you don't get anything done. You can spend a lot of time coding and not finish anything. To get it finished, you have to limit the scope pretty drastically, because it's just so much more work possibly than even an experienced programmer could imagine. But it's doable. The second thing, as a game designer, again, you're kind of trying to limit the scope a little bit. Your game has to have a reason for being. There has to be certain things that you're trying to model and that really drive the design. You know, for me in this game, it was simulating the commander's mind, who's running a battalion or a brigade, possibly a regiment, certainly. You know, what kind of issues does he face? What's his viewpoint? You're not going to play every single position of every man on the battlefield. You're playing the one that's the commander. So things that are of interest to him, he needs to know, you represent. Things that are somebody else's job, you don't represent quite as much. There's a selective fidelity and extract out a lot of that. You know, supply, for example. So as a designer, pick out 3 to 5 things possibly that this is what the game is going to portray and do. If you go too high and have too many, the game becomes so confusing and it's such a high learning curve that people struggle. If you don't have enough, if you have one, you know, you've got tic-tac-toe, people's interest. But if you can pick 3 to 5 things that are really interesting, then you can jump in and I think create a really interesting game. Just keep the scope in check so you don't actually make it too hard to finish. And one last thing I'd mention for game designers, tell a fun story. Well, obviously, everybody wants to tell a fun story. What makes a war game fun? Well, actually, it's very specific. Present the player with an interesting dilemma. And there'll be a whole series of them, but let's pick one. Say you're playing NATO, and the very first Soviet Warsaw Pact unit shows up on the map. It's a couple of scout cars. You have lots of artillery, but you've not been given very much ammunition for them. So the dilemma is, oh, do I shoot or not? And you go, well, you know, the developer said the reconnaissance battle is supremely important. Maybe I should take a shot. So you're thinking, okay, I'm going to take a shot. And you give orders to your artillery. In this game, as commander overall, you don't fire the gun. You give orders to your staff. They call down to the battery, talk to the guy, give him the target, all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, it's computer. Then it was voice. It takes minutes from the time you form the intent as commander until the shells impact on the target zone. So, stage 2 of fun. You create a period of suspense. You've made the decision. Now you wait. And in this game, you click on the game clock to start it, and the minutes start to tick by. You're looking at that reconnaissance unit going, okay, you know, let's see the artillery animations. Let's see the explosions. And the time's ticking. You're going, oh, yeah, it takes a while for artillery. Will they get it done in time or not? So you're creating the suspense. And darned if the recon unit doesn't move a hex. It's moved out of where you just. And then it moves again. And then it moves again. And you're going, oh, the game will correct the fire if somebody's observing, but not by very much. And then the artillery animations arrive. And that's the relief of the suspense. That's stage 3. So you create a dilemma, you had a period of suspense, and then within a reasonable amount of time, you've resolved it. I missed. Gee. But you do it in a way that's understandable. Oh, I was too late. It took too long. Gee, maybe if I'm shooting at a fast-moving reconnaissance unit, artillery is not the best way to go. Oh, I know something now for next time. Try it differently. And so you do this. You don't create too many of these or you overwhelm the player. You don't create too few or you bore them. Some are little, like what I've just described. Some take the whole game to find out. Because of fog of war, you may put up a defense here at this bridge, expecting the enemy to come for it. Guess what? Half an hour later, you find out his objective was far to the north. It was that other bridge up there. Oh, so creating, suspending, and then answering, kind of resolving, is what you want to do to really get people hooked. And when they end up finishing that, they'll go, oh, I want to play that again. I want to do that again, because this time I know what to do.
Yeah.
And you've got a happy person.
Thank you, Rob. That's great advice. And I personally relate to that last example. I did actually try that at one point myself. And I want to thank you, Rob, for joining us today. I'm sure we'll be releasing more information on Southern Storm in 2021, but I'm glad fans of Flashpoint campaigns should now have a very good idea of what's coming their way. And to everyone who's watching and listening, if you haven't already tried this great series, but you're curious about the Cold War or about the Grand Tactical Scale or asynchronous WeGo war games, give it a shot. And we'll catch you again later. Thank you, everyone.